What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to what will now be a recurring Saturday episode where it's time to get your true crime fill with the renowned detective Fil Waters, who's on the top of your screen. Before we get to him, it is now over 40 days since this quadruple homicide. No murder suspect named, no persons of interest named, and no weapon to be found anywhere. The man with the trimmer goatee is Fil Waters. Get your true crime fill with him every Saturday. He spent decades in law enforcement, becoming an expert at obtaining criminal confessions, spending 23 years of his life as a homicide detective in the Houston Police Department and investigating more than 400 homicide cases, including, sadly, one that took the life of his good friend and fellow police officer. Detective Waters is also a Marine and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations and starred in the show The Interrogator. The man with the poster that says "Sheep No More" is Jonathan Gilliam. He's a career public servant with over 20 years of service as a Navy SEAL, an FBI special agent, a federal Air Marshal. He's done private security. He's been a contractor. He's been a police officer. He has done it all, and he's also an author of the book Sheep No More, hence the poster behind his shoulder, and a kid's book, believe it or not. That scary man has written a kid's book, The Adventures of Team Little Big. So welcome to both of you. Quick housekeeping notes. We are found anywhere podcasts are listened to. People have been asking about that. If you want to get our newsletter, drop it in the comment section on YouTube. Support us at Patreon. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And as my 8-year-old daughter says, make sure they hit the like button because it helps the algorithm. As I like to do each and every time, let's remember the names of those victims. Let us never forget the young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogan, 21. Kaylee Gonzalez, 21. Xander Kernodle, 20. And Ethan Chapin, 20 years old. You guys are in for a treat. These are two of the baddest guests anyone can get, and we do get the best guests on SB. So let's start with some breaking news, which actually was released in the Argonaut, the University of Idaho student paper. And this, as they say in the news business, just crossed the wires just a few moments ago. This is on Friday. This will air Saturday, so it'll be a little delayed. But University of Idaho professor Rebecca Schofield filed charges of defamation against TikToker and internet sleuth Ashley Gillard. That happened this week. The charges come as Gillard has made multiple claims on TikTok accusing Schofield to be a suspect of the homicides that claimed the life of 4 U of I students, and claimed beyond that this professor was having some sort of sexual relationship with Kaylee Gonzalez. So, Phil, to you first. You need to be careful, especially if you're a cyber sleuth, about defaming people. Is that right?
Oh, of course. And this is one of the offshoots of something like this, where you have a person who is obviously involved in the true crime network or community of people and gets off on some crazy conspiracy theory and has no foundation in that other than what is going on in their head. And of course, this causes a great deal of angst for this person that's now suing them, and draws a lot of attention, unnecessary attention to that person. And it's just, it's an unfortunate consequence of this type of atmosphere and environment.
And Jonathan, obviously this person has no investigative background of the nature that you and Phil bring to the table, which is decades of experience. Apparently she was using tarot cards in other readings. But again, this is just an example of how things can go awry quickly when people out there think that they're you guys as investigators with real experience, right?
Oh, we use tarot cards all the time. Actually, I use Uno cards when I try to figure it out. No, I think this is interesting. I think we talked about this before, is that there's a dynamic that is occurring now, especially in this case, that it's happened before, but it's really amping up, where these online sleuths are actually feeding the media, and the media is responding to these really salacious nothings. Like they had the body cam of one of the officers who stopped. I mean, it doesn't take a genius investigator to figure this out. He stops 4 young guys that are going through this field. There's a party going up there, and then you can see in the background about 4 more people walk through the light. And it was all over the news that these internet sleuths had found these other individuals walking through the light. I mean, they're probably the same thing that the cops just stopped. It's there were a massive amount of parties going on at that time. So what's happening is that the media is not turning to law enforcement anymore for headlines. They're going to internet sleuths, and all this stuff is getting pushed up, and they report it as though it's fact. And then when you read the story and you see where it came from, there's nothing there. So that seems to be happening a lot. And then, as I've been critical of the Gonçalves family, that's another aspect of it. I've seen families in the news before that have, been in the news constantly. I know when O.J. Simpson killed Nicole Brown Simpson, her dad was in the media a lot, but he was trying to point out facts. He was trying to push the prosecution forward and trying to get the public on board with the reality of what happened. But he did it in a way that was not it didn't give away facts about the case. And I think when we see the Gonçalves father in particular, what we've seen is a similar thing as with these online sleuths, where they're giving out information that could hurt the investigation. They then went inside and got a court order. I don't know if they even got a court order. If the police department just said, go on in and take stuff out of the house. So they have both physically injured the crime scene and done the same thing with sleuths, where they're getting reported for all these facts that haven't been validated by police.
Phil, what do you think about what Jonathan just had to say?
Well, I would agree with him 100%. I just kind of wanted to piggyback on what he had said, and the aspect of people getting involved in this thing. And he's exactly right when he talks about now the media is going to these online sleuths and kind of ignoring what law enforcement is now telling them, and the communication between law enforcement and the media and the public, at least in my estimation, has become much better since the beginning of this. So they finally have refined the delivery of the message, and they are being a little bit more disciplined about what they say in front of these microphones. Now, the media for years, there's nothing new what's going on today. And I face this a lot, especially officer-involved shootings, where we have a lot of facts that are being stated or shared, but they're not telling the truth. So when we talk about this video that Jonathan talked about, the 4 individuals behind the scene, and it was put out as though it was some sort of big discovery about these online sleuths. And look, law enforcement they're the ones that released the video, for crying out loud. Don't you think that they probably saw the 4 people walking around behind there? So again, a statement of facts without telling the truth. So, and it goes on continually, especially in a high profile homicide like this one. So with regards to Mr. Gonçalves, I agree too with Jonathan. Look, I do understand what that man is going through. I've got 2 daughters. I have a son. And I have dealt with families that have had their family members ripped from them by an act of violence. I have prayed with those families. I have been in their presence when they have broken down in front of me. So I do understand what he is feeling. The other side of that is that he doesn't give anything. He doesn't contribute anything to the investigation when he stands up in front of these microphones and starts to voice his opinion about what he thinks is going on. It's just not beneficial to the investigation. and he seems to have ratcheted that back a little bit here lately, and I'm just hoping that excuse me, that's a result of better communication between the investigators and the families.
I have a feeling it's because he got an attorney. That attorney.
Well, if you want to screw something up, hire an attorney, right? So I'm with William Shakespeare on that. First, we kill all the attorneys. First, we kill all the lawyers.
Jonathan, I know you were vocal about Stephen Gonzalez. The father has been in the media more than most think he should be. Any further thoughts before we move on? Just to give you the floor on that.
Well, I'm glad that they finally stopped talking so much, but I thought it was very interesting because they just transitioned to using the attorney to say the very same things. One day, the attorney came out and said and integrated some comments that Gonzalez had said before about how the police department was inept, but then the next day he comes out and says that the coroner should be quiet and is saying too much. So it's like, there's. What people have to understand is that investigations are only going to move as fast as there's evidence coming in. It doesn't matter how inept the Moscow Police Department is. There's 40 other people out there doing some investigation of some sort. If there was massive evidence coming in, they would want to solve this problem because otherwise they're going to lose a tremendous amount of people and never come back to that university. So they want to solve the problem. I think there may be egos there, but I don't think that they're trying to not solve it. And so when the family comes out and they say these things, it does disrupt the investigation, and it also causes them to start trying to be more politically correct. And on the other side of that, I still stand by what I said about his behavior. And I would hope, for the sake of the investigation, that any family member is questioned and cleared. There's just too often that family members kill their own family members. And so I don't know why we shouldn't, from an investigative standpoint, why we shouldn't look and clear these people.
Moving on to the kind of the news of the day to get your reaction. And then I promise Saturdays are all about taking viewer questions and comments. And we have a bunch for these two men to respond to. Chief Fry was interviewed by Brian Enton of News Nation, who is a friend, for full disclosure. And he asked the chief just the other day, is the killer still in the area? Flat out asked him. The response was, and I quote directly here, "We are not disclosing any of that. Some of that we just don't know at this point." Phil, to you, you're the man who knows how to crack suspects, the interrogator. How do you read that we're not disclosing that, and at the same time he says some of that we just don't know?
Well, that's a question that there's not a right answer to, right? So that's the question of Joel, when did you stop beating your wife? Right. So that's right. So the chief is responding to try to answer both sides of what that question might mean, and I think he did. He said what he could say in a way that, look, we're not going to disclose that information if we have it. So he said the one thing and then he qualified what he just said. So I think his response was completely appropriate.
Sounds like a politician a little bit, but that's
well, you know what? I mean, these things. You've got to be able to convey a message without compromising what you have going on. And so, I don't know that I would call it a political answer. I think it's the proper answer given the circumstances.
I was a slight kid, but I understand and I agree with you. And obviously they've got to keep everything close to the vest. KTVB out of Boise, Idaho, local television and local news breaks a lot of stories. I thought this was interesting. I just wanted to run it by you guys and see if this is what you would expect. But the chief says he starts his day with multiple briefings at 7 a.m. As more information and tips come in throughout the day, more meetings follow. He says that every resource is being utilized to its full ability. Teams are working over the holidays, and investigators are driven by the need to bring closure to the families. And he went on to say, I'm very confident that we're going to solve this. We've heard the rumors that this case has gone cold. This case has not gotten cold. We've been hearing people say that we don't have the right people. I'm telling you, we have the right people in place. We have the right resources. We have the right individuals, and we have a lot of experience. And he went on and on. Jonathan, any of this stand out, or is this sort of what you would expect the chief of police in Moscow to tell people?
I think what we're hearing from that chief is our sound bites from a chief who's never had to be in front of the camera before. And you know, I'll go back to what Phil was saying there. You know, this is political, right? Politics, they push all these investigations one way or the other. If you have a family that's connected, or in this case, you have a smaller police department that exists in a town where it's, you know, it thrives from the university and the business of that university, it is political. So you do have to make your statements in a way that are not going to cause the city, the university, the politician to get angry. You're working from his standpoint all these different angles while you're trying not to give away information, and at the same time maybe put little things in there to try to pull a killer forward to say something or do something. So what I would like to see with this chief do more is give more of a positive spin on it, because you know how you were in media, I was am in media, and you have to own the airwaves. You have to own that soundbite, and I would like to see him describe more about how this is working. You know, a lot of the questions that I've been asked is, should they step aside and let the state police or the FBI? Everybody loves to say, let the FBI take over. Well, the FBI doesn't just roll in and like the movies and take over. So I'd like to see this this chief kind of divert these questions and just go back to the fact that we have a task force. This is things are being cataloged and they're gone through, and we have diligent investigators are going to be here over Christmas and New Year's, ready to take in and investigate things. I think if he gives that spin on it, what it does is it gives confidence to the people around that they are really working this and they're not inept or so political that it's not going anywhere. I think that's where he could improve that.
Phil, you shook your head no about the FBI coming right in. You want to add?
Well, only because of people saying it.
Yeah.
You know, to address what Jonathan was just talking about in regarding to the political aspect of it, I would agree with that definition of the politics of this thing. The chief, from the very beginning of this thing, from the first time, for the first presser that he held, was clearly overwhelmed with what he had seen and what he was aware of what had happened. So, and like Jonathan just said, look, this is an experience that this chief, in whatever his time in law enforcement, and certainly as the chief of police in Moscow, has never experienced anything like this ever. And you're talking about a college town of 28,000 people. You got a police force of 36 sworn and support personnel. They had 7 homicides in the last 15 years in Moscow, Idaho. They had 4 in one night. So this is completely out of their wheelhouse. And so the chief is, I think, is being criticized inappropriately based on the circumstances that he's been thrust into. Now, I will say that from that point forward, the communication has gotten better, I think. I've done these pressers, these high-profile cases. I know what the pressure is, and so I have an understanding of what he's trying to accomplish, and I think he is getting better at that. They've also had some of the questions go to the captain there, and then they've had some to a PIO who's also been involved as well. I think the chief has to be very, again, disciplined about what he says out there. And I agree with Jonathan. It needs to be, whatever his response is, it needs to have a positive spin to it. I get really irritated when I hear this nonsense about the case is going cold. Let me tell you something. Cold cases do not become cold cases until a criteria is met. And I can tell you for the Houston Police Department, and I don't think it's much different around the country, but for a case to go cold at the Houston Police Department Homicide Division, you've got to have that case for 3 years, and every lead, every clue, every piece of evidence has been exhausted, and you've hit the wall, and there is nowhere else to go with it. That is what defines a cold case, and then it is delivered to the cold case unit for further follow-up if there is something else that comes up later on, new information. So I know it sounds very television-like. I know it sounds very spectacular to say the case is going cold, and I keep hearing this over and over again. And that is a bad term to use. It does not support a positive, and what Jonathan was talking about, the positive things that are going on in this investigation. So to keep suggesting over and over again, this case is going cold. They're only a month into this thing. They've been given what they've been given. They have hundreds of pieces of evidence, everything from DNA stuff to trace evidence to physical evidence. They have, what is it now? That counts 15,000 clues coming in on the internet, through the phone lines, through emails, and they've added. I think I read where they've added some agents to this thing. And look, there are so many moving parts in a very complicated investigation. And when I shook my head about the FBI involvement in this thing, people need to understand this happened in the city of Moscow, Idaho. Moscow, Idaho PD is the lead agency in this investigation, and they will remain that. The state comes in and the FBI comes in at the request of the chief of police in Moscow PD. So they are there because at least they had enough wisdom and foresight, because they knew this was way, way above their experience level, and they needed this support and the resources that these other agencies bring to the table. I just saw an article today where they had an FBI agent up, or a former FBI agent, addressing this. Why doesn't the FBI take it over? Well, it's like Jonathan said, it's not Die Hard. Gentlemen, I give you the FBI. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. And because it is a jurisdictional question here. And there is no federal nexus to this investigation. And so they're there for support, but the Moscow PD will remain the lead agency in the investigation.
And I'm glad you brought that up. John, I'll give you a chance to jump in real quick. But Law and Crime is reporting right on the heels of what Phil just mentioned, that now the FBI, your former agency, Jonathan, is the intake point for all tips and leads. They're prioritizing them and then delegating them for investigation. Is that what you'd expect, Jonathan?
Yeah. So I think what is occurring here with the Moscow Police Department is they're using what the FBI does best, which is not just put investigators out there, but they build a task force. So that's what the FBI is really good at, is coming in and facilitating what the locals don't have so they can build a task force. And one of those things is a massive call center, which I'll be honest with you, I don't have a lot of faith in because I've dealt with them before. And they're basically 911 operators without the 911 operator experience that comes with working in a city like Houston. So I'm not real stoked about, but still, they're bringing a task force in there along with state police and all. And you got to remember, when they say the FBI is there with investigators, the FBI is not just FBI agents, it's a task force. So you may have ICE agents that are there, you may have DEA, all these different entities that have the abilities to reach out in different ways. They come along with the task force. So that's the thing that's really interesting about this. Well, what I was going to say was two things. One, the story that I think Phil's referencing, that was me. I think I got interviewed yesterday by Fox, and that's what we were talking about, how if this went over state lines, if they show that this is a serial killer or that the killer, we have evidence that it went over state lines, now the FBI would have some type of jurisdiction in investigating that. They may actually do an investigation side by side with Moscow PD. But Moscow PD, for this murder right now, this is their jurisdiction and they own that whole scene. So if they wanted to step out of the way, they could and allow state police. And so they then take a backseat role. But I can guarantee you, no prosecutor is going to want that. No chief of police is going to want that. They want that. I mean, that's why they're in that job. But the other thing I was going to say, one other thing about these press conferences that I wish we could get this information to that chief is that he needs to stop doing on-the-fly pressers where he's standing in the parking lot by himself or up against a wall talking to one reporter. They need to have a podium. They need to have whoever's there from the FBI and the state police, and they give their briefs then like that. These one-off briefs look so small town or like
amateurs. Yeah, they look amateurs.
Yeah, they're very amateurish. And I'm sure Phil would back me up on that. I mean, you would never see something like that from the Houston Police Department. Never.
And is that just because of optics? You want to at least give the impression that you know what you're doing. And I'm not saying that they don't know what they're doing, but like you said, it comes off small townish, right? So Phil, is that to give the feel like Houston PD, if this, God forbid, happened in Houston, like Jonathan suggested, you'd have daily briefings. There would be a podium. It would be a lot more kind of professional. Yeah.
Well, I know we've had these things happen in Houston. I mean, I worked a triple homicide that was a high profile case in Houston. We've worked other multiple fatality killings. But I know in those cases now in Houston, the detectives would hold the presser. And the chief of police might come to the presser, say a few words before the questions were being asked by the media, and then he would step away from the podium and let the guys that are in the trenches doing the work answer the questions. Now, and we were prepared. There were going to be questions that we were not going to answer, and there were questions that we were going to answer. If there was a question asked that the chief felt like he needed to respond to, then he would step back to the podium and he would respond to it and then turn it back over to the detectives. Or it might be the captain from the homicide division. So you might have a gold badge there just for that purpose to convey that, look, this thing, we are in control of this. These are our guys doing the work. They're answering, and we presented to them the optics that we are competent in what we are doing. We are following every lead we can, and we are briefing the chief of police on what we are succeeding at and where we are in the investigation. And I think that's to what Jonathan's alluding to here, that those things have not been done in this case only because you've got a chief who's been thrust into a worldwide event now at this point, and he's never been in that house before. He's never been in that position before. And he's learning as he goes. This is OJT stuff for this chief on this thing.
Phil, also with that, the coroner's given their own interview.
Yeah.
The prosecutor came and gave his own interview. I mean, this isn't the way these things work because also, Marine, SEAL, we do the thing, and the Bureau hated when I used to do this, but because they said we're law enforcement, we don't do this. But I believe in time hacks. If the phone system goes down and you got your watch and everybody's on the same time, well, then you're going to be more in uniform and your mind is just thinking as a team. When you do these briefs together, you're a team. But if you have, the elected coroner and this prosecutor over there, it's just, you don't know what they're going to say.
Well, that was, I agree, Jonathan. Look, that when the coroner came out and said what she said, and then she's also a local defense attorney, criminal defense attorney, and she's got some client that stuck somebody with a knife or something 5 years ago. I mean, just off these bunny trails that have nothing to do with anything other than it makes good press. And then you have the prosecutor that got up and he said something, and then the law enforcement turned right around and countermanded what he just said. So,
Right.
yeah, I know, I agree with you completely. You've got to have one spokesperson up there. It needs to be a scheduled event, and let them get all their microphones up there and all the people there, answer the questions that can be answered. And then when it's over with, it's over with. And you only have it for a certain time frame. You don't just let this thing go on into perpetuity. You have a scheduled event, you go through it. We're going to do it for 30 minutes, then you're done and you move on, and then you schedule the next one. But I agree with you completely. These reporters following this poor chief around everywhere he goes, and then sticking a microphone in his face whenever they have an opportunity. It doesn't sit well with me, just having been in that position. I mean, even at a crime scene, even at a homicide scene, the media was held at bay until I got ready to go up there and give them their soundbite. So there has to be some discipline and some control over the media, and that's only done by the agency that's involved with it. So I agree.
Yeah, and I can tell you firsthand, on the flip side of that, as a reporter covering many of these cases, we would always defer to the police. There's always a perimeter set up. You never go over the crime tape. There's a media staging area, and you do wait for the police, especially if it's a high-profile case. There's a respect factor there. But just to underscore, because I can see some hate mail coming our way from keyboard warriors, I don't think in any way Phil or Jonathan are saying that the police are not doing the work and they're not competent. All they're saying is that there's a more professional way to handle the optics of what they're doing, but it doesn't have to do with the police work itself. Phil, there was something else that came out from WTVB in Boise, Idaho, and this is just to show, look, these guys are human beings. Chief James Fry is a person, just like the three of us. Sorry, I saw double for a moment. And he said, he described it as a pit in your stomach, how he described getting the call from his captain that Sunday on November 13th, when all 4 students were pronounced dead after a 911 call around noon. The scene was bloody. A local coroner said it looked like the students had been sleeping at the time of the attack. Fry was away for the weekend with his wife and said he immediately drove back to 2.5 hours. A plan, he said, was already in place. But that line, a pit in your stomach, I know you had the awful, dubious job of trying to solve one of your friend's homicides, Phil. What is the feeling like for you? Not maybe because that's so close to home, but when you get a call in the middle of the night that there's been a brutal homicide, from a human standpoint, what does it feel like for you? Not just as an investigator, or do you have to compartmentalize and take that emotion away?
Well, I got those phone calls many times to make scenes in the middle of the night. And I always try to prepare myself by being objective in terms of preparation of walking into the scene, being objective about what I was walking into. I didn't want to be predisposed to any kind of a conclusion, because I was going to get a briefing from the patrol officer that made that scene, and he's going to give me a kind of a briefing on what we have. Then we're going to walk in there, we're going to take a look at it. And at that point in time, the minute I cross that threshold, I have to let the scene talk to me. And in terms of dealing with it, there may be a moment depending on the scene. I can only tell you that we made every dead baby case in the city of Houston that didn't die in a hospital. So I can tell you, having had 3 kids, walking into one of those scenes, or as a child, I can tell you that I'll use the chief's description. The pit in the stomach doesn't even begin to describe what that kind of realization is when you walk in there. You think you would be able to build a little bit of a wall, or harden that skin a little bit, but I can tell you that I've always said that I think we only had so many of those cases in us, So I can completely empathize with that chief and what he may have seen. I mean, look, we had Andrea Yates, several years ago that drowned 5 of her children in the bathtub. Talk about a horrific scene. And I had a scene where an ex HPD officer that had been fired had shot his 5-year-old son in the back with a shotgun and drowned his 1.5-year-old son in the bathtub. So let me tell you, I walk into those scenes, and I will tell you, my description of that is I'm a Christ follower, and I can tell you that when I walked into those types of scenes, I felt like that I could hear the devil laughing and putting me in that situation and trying to challenge me on my faith. And so I've been there. I know what that chief is feeling. And I can tell you it is something that he will never forget.
Joe, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I love the way Phil's describing this because as he's talking, I'm kind of reflecting back on some of the things I've seen and been a part of. And I reflect on 2 things as you talk about that. One is the body farm in Knoxville, Tennessee. I got to go to that. And there's approximately 175 bodies buried underground in different ways. And then over 100 bodies just laid out in different aspects. One would be half the body would be under a car and the other half would be out. There was one woman whose body was in like one of the dumpster things, not a big dumpster, but the one you put your trash in and roll out to the street. She'd been in there for 14 months through the winter and 2 summers. So the smell and the overwhelming just observation impact that this had, the thing that I know that most listeners can identify with, I don't have any kids, but I have nephews and nieces where I've had to change their diaper before. You can't go into that changing the diaper with your nose wide open and without shutting something off in your brain, because you'll get sick to your stomach, So you shut your nose off, you shut your brain off, you do what you have to do, you clean it up, and then when the baby's all happy, then you give the emotion. And I think it's the same thing with this. There has to be, and I learned this in the SEAL teams, but I also really refine this in Ranger School, is that, there's a work you, and then there's the you that puts everything aside and lives their life. And good investigators can utilize both of those things, but all of them, no matter how hardened you are going to succumb to certain things sometimes. I've had good buddies who were part of the pedophile squad, and they had to leave that squad. Hardened guys, they could shut it off, concentrate on their job, take the emotion out of it. But it just got to a point where those images would pop into their brain and it would hurt them like mentally. So there's an aspect to all this police work investigating, is just like a neurosurgeon or anybody else, where you shut that off and you deal with what you have to do. And then hopefully when you turn your brain back on, you're not going to allow your emotions to push you forward. You're going to let the evidence push you forward.
Right. And Jonathan, I think you bring up a really interesting point too. It's not just seeing the horrors that you and Phil have seen, but it's three-dimensional experience. You're getting the smell, and I remember in no way comparing myself to you guys. I would never be that dumb, but I did work at 3 World Financial, which is basically connected to the World Trade Centers on 9/11. Couldn't make it in that day. I lived in Hoboken. I was on a ferry on the way in, and I watched the towers fall. But that following Tuesday, it happened on a Tuesday, I went back to the New York Stock Exchange where I was working, and I will never, for the rest of my life, forget that smell, that acrid smell of death and aluminum. It smelled like if you lit a Coca-Cola can on fire. So in that experience, I don't think about it often, obviously on the anniversary, but now that we're talking about it, that all the sensory, the smell, the sight, all that stuff comes back. So it's a tough job, obviously, and you guys have seen some horrific things. And again, the chief saw some horrible things. So let's have some empathy for him. As far as the news goes on, I could talk to you guys for 3 hours, which we might end up doing today and make this a Joe Rogan experience. But Zana Kernodle's family mailed out 5,000 flyers with tip lines. Phil, in your experience, is it sort of SOP for families to do this? Does it get in the way of people like you doing your police work? Obviously, they want answers. We talked about the Gonzalez's, but Zana Kernodle's family wants answers too.
I don't know that it's SOP. I don't think it's uncommon. Sometimes you'll have, I've had cases where the family really wanted to be involved in the process, and this was a way to allow them to do that. And look, to a degree, it is therapeutic. It keeps them at least thinking about some sort of a positive outcome and driving to that end. So I don't think there's anything untoward or inappropriate about them being involved at that level.
So there's some things that came up that aren't, what I would call typical news, but there's a story out there about the university server going down. It was down around the time of these murders. I don't know if either of you have heard this. I got a tip today with a screenshot basically saying that it looks like it was routine service. A lot of times, like Saturday nights into Sundays, servers go down. But apparently, according to reports, and this has not been corroborated, that would have included like surveillance cameras, on campus going down at these times. It just happened to be during the same window as the time of these 4 killings. Jonathan, is that concerning, or do you just take it at face value that this was probably routine maintenance?
So I never take anything at face value as investigator. I would, as dumb as it sounds, I would still have somebody just see who was involved with that and what was going on. But the chances of somebody in Moscow, Idaho, at the University of Idaho, having the ability to shut down all the cameras at the exact precise time when their cohort is going to go murder somebody. I mean, this isn't James Bond and this isn't the movies. I mean, this is, why? Why would you want to do that with 4 people? What would be the motive to do that? And why would they need surveillance cameras? If that's the university, this was an off-campus house. So that, unless the person's going to go murder somebody and then run across campus with blood all over them, it doesn't really do any good. So I think these are things that the sleuths will jump on, and they'll make a big deal out of this.
And that's the most important point. It was an off-campus house. Another thing that has come up quite a bit, I had a guest on, Scott Roeder, who's kind of a world expert in crime scene reconstruction. An interesting guy, but he was particularly miffed about the fact that I guess dogs weren't used at the onset. Phil, I don't really know if any dogs were used. Obviously, I wasn't there. From what we're hearing, they were not. But if you were running this investigation as a lead detective, would you have had cadaver dogs out there trying to pick up a scent leading to someone who committed the crimes?
Well, the short answer is no.
Okay.
I would not have introduced dogs to a quadruple murder crime scene. There are times to use that type of resource, and there are times not to. For someone to second guess why dogs weren't, and I had seen this before on some of the commentary about why didn't it get a bloodhound in there and track down come on. So in that particular scene, you have so many different scents. You've got the victims, you've got the suspect or suspects, you've got the officers that showed up, you've got the crime scene people that showed up to process the scene. And I don't know whether or not they use the FBI evidence recovery team on this thing, but I would assume that they may have used those resources. So you've got all sorts of people coming in there to work this scene. I can tell you that because of the time frame involved as well. You've got this thing doesn't even get. They believe it happened between 3 and 4 a.m. I think is what I've read, and they don't get the 911 call until around noon the next day. So you've got a lot of again, you have a lot of moving parts within the scene itself, and different people moving in and out of there. To think that we're going to get a dog that is so talented that they're going to somehow be able to pick up the scent of the killer and follow them to their destination is just, again, been watching too much television.
But Joel, Phil was a Marine, so would you suggest using cats?
No, Phil is a Marine.
Oh, well, that's right. Yeah, I'm glad you corrected me on that.
I'm not even getting
Jonathan,
involved
Jonathan, there's only two types of people in the world, right?
Yes, I know.
Those that want to be Marines and those that are.
There are.
Like I said, I'm not getting involved because if anything goes down, I'm running
That's all
behind.
right. That's a friendly sister service back and forth.
I'm the first one to run behind you guys if anything happens. So another thing that was super interesting to me, because it was so obvious and it never crossed my mind until I got this comment, but we're constantly hearing from cyber sleuths about maybe it was this student, maybe it was that student, maybe it was the guy in the hoodie. What about investigating and looking at professors, faculty, custodial staff? Phil, I would assume, again, if you're the lead detective on this, that's not something that you are omitting or leaving out. You're looking at everybody as a possible suspect.
Well, sure you are. And look, and what Jonathan alluded to earlier was talking about earlier, you're going to look at people, this kind of a crime scene, you're working from the inside out. And you've got to, the first place you're going to go are the people that are the most intimate relationships with these four folks, these four kids. And so, sure, you're going to go look at family, and then you're going to expand that, and then you're going to start working out. And of course, you're going to find out who their professors were, what kind of relationship did they have with those professors? Is there anything to that? And in regards to the real crime people that are on the internet and all that community of people, they do contribute. I don't want to put them in a negative light. They do contribute a lot of things to it, in the sense that they may be asking a lot of different questions. I never put anything of that to the side, because if I've got somebody, look, I'm the biggest poacher on the face of the planet when it comes to being able to investigate a homicide better than what I'm already doing it. And if I see something on a real crime show, or I see something that's contributed by a person who's in that real crime community that I think I can use, by golly, I'm going to use it. So it's not always a negative thing. The problem is you have a few people that kind of make the whole community look a little crazy, because they come up with some insane conspiracy theories that even the real crime people that are involved in that, they don't buy into it. So it's kind of one of these, you're who you're associated with kind of a thing. So
they're also very emotional. This is a big problem with these online sleuths, is they're just like Twitter people who just want to fight and argue if you disagree with what they think. And when I came up and said that this behavior of the family was odd, they need to be cleared. I mean, one guy, you can go look it up. He did on YouTube. He did an entire hour show. He's from Scotland, about how horrible I am. And it was the worst news hit he's ever seen when I was on Newsmax saying this. And a real investigator would take all these things into account, no matter how ridiculous they are. And they would vet these things. They would clear them. They aren't going to get emotional because, like Casey Anthony, there's another case right now, very similar to that, where the girl didn't report. I think it might even be in Texas, where the girl didn't report her missing 11-year-old. No, it's South Carolina. For 21 days, she didn't report this, and they don't know where this girl is. So these things occur, and you have to be able to ask the hard questions and not freak out emotionally when it's not what you think it would be.
Right. And to what Jonathan has just said, it is as important to eliminate suspects as it is to find the right one.
Right.
So that's all part of the process. Everybody's looked at. And look, how many times, I can tell you my own experience, I've had a suspect and it was always letting the evidence lead me where I need to be. I don't take it someplace I want it to go. It's always a journey for the truth. And I had a suspect I was absolutely convinced was a suspect. And then when I furthered my investigation, you have an epiphany and you go, you know what? This is not the suspect. And then I've had that in reverse where I've had a witness come in and I'm taking a statement from them and I'm going, this is really a great witness. Oh my gosh. And then I get about 3/4 through it and I realize I'm not talking to a witness. I'm talking to the suspect. And then the whole scope of the interview starts to change. So it is very, these investigations, any homicide investigation, but this one in particular, they're always very fluid. And you do not, it's kind of the old Ronald Reagan adage about the USSR: trust but verify.
I think in this case, Joe, I think it's going to be very important for them to build a broad picture of normalcy in that community, what happens on a daily basis in and around that house and that community, so that they can then look for the minute things that were different on that night at that time. And it's been a month now. You'd be so surprised. I know Phil backed me up on this. It's been a month. Life has probably pretty much gone back to normal. People will, within a month, they will go back to doing their regular routine and they'll think about what happened, but they're not going to close the curtain on when they take a shower any more than they did, before the murders happened. So they could look at the broader scope of what was going on in that community before, what's going on now, and then look for minute changes in the behavior in and around that house. And they might be able to see something. The problem with that is that it's that house, as we saw in that video that was just released. I mean, they were having a party and nobody was even there that lived there in that house. So, but again, that may be a detail.
Turn out that one of the surviving roommates was in the house. It's not clear whether she was living in the house at the time, but that is a detail. But I know people will come at us, so I just want to clarify that. Phil, since there was a show basically named after you called The Interrogator, let's. I promise you, we're getting to viewer questions and comments, but these guys are so interesting. Hypothetical here, Phil. You get someone you think is a suspect in this case, and you're in the interrogation room. Take us into the mind of Fil Waters. How do you lead this suspect in a line of questioning to get him to crack? What is your technique now that you're retired? You can maybe share some of the secret sauce.
Well, I don't. Number one, I never liked the title of that show, The Interrogator, because that's not what I did. I was developing my skill in the art of the interview, because just the word interrogation has a negative connotation to it. I mean, would you rather I interview you, Joel, or would you rather I interrogate you?
100%. But you're almost, if not equally, as much a psychologist as you are a detective. But I'm curious.
Well, there's a whole lot of components to the art. A general sense of my approach, and it was different every time. And this is what I would instruct in interview classes that I taught, is that the body language, concentrate a whole lot on, but body language and the nonverbal signals and the verbal signals and those kinds of things, those are all the same. I mean, I don't care what interview school you go to, those are all the same. Now, they may call it something different just to attach some sort of new buzzword to whatever they're teaching. But I can tell you that the way I taught interviewing and the way I continue to teach interviewing, it's all about the attitude of the interview. So to answer your question about how would I approach, it would depend on who I am approaching, because it's not going to be the same for every person that I had in that interview. But what I always kept in mind is that number one, life is always is all about relationships. From the minute you come out of that chute, the doctor hits you on the butt and says, "Welcome to the world." That's a relationship. And we go through life having relationships with people. Some of them may be shallow, some of them may be very deep, some may be in the middle there somewhere. But if you use the example of walking into a Walmart or a Target and you go up there and you buy your stuff, and you've got a clerk that's not, got up on the wrong side of the bed that morning, not really a happy person, not a very joyful person, and you go and you make your purchase, and you have a relationship there that only lasts a couple of minutes, but it's nonetheless a relationship, and you walk away from it and you don't really feel terribly enthused about what just happened. You may not be able to put your finger on it, but you just don't feel good about what just happened. Then you go in there 2 days later and you go up to the clerk checking you out, and they've got a great attitude. They're vibrant. They're appear to be a joyful person, and you walk away from that relationship, although it's only about a couple of minutes, with a much better feeling about what's going to be the rest of your day. And so, having said all that, when I walk into an interview room, no matter who I'm talking to, it's about establishing that relationship. And in order to do that, there are a couple things that I have to remember. Number one, regardless of race, creed, color, culture, orientation, whatever flavor they may be, they must be treated with dignity and respect, no matter what. Then the other thing I need to remember is that all of those factors, race, creed, color, orientation, so forth, are wiped away when we remember that all of us, universally, have three things in common. We all want to be loved, we all want to be respected, and we all want to take care of those who love and respect us. We just make different choices about how we accomplish those three things. So when I walk into that interview room with that in my head, treating those people with dignity and respect, it allows me to develop the ability to speak to anyone. And because they know, and again, I'm trying to get them to trust me. And in my situation where I'm working a homicide, I'm trying to get somebody to convey to me the truth about this horrific act that they just committed on another human being. And so in order for that to happen, they have to trust that I'm not in there judging them. I'm not in there for the purpose of trying to figure out what I'm going to charge them with. That's not what this interview is about. This interview is recognizing those three things we have in common, treating them with dignity and respect, and then getting as close to the truth as we can possibly get.
And how much are you watching them and their body language as you are listening to what they're saying?
Well, it's a multifaceted process. I have to sit in there, and again, this is a discipline, and this is about experience, about doing this over and over. It's an art that you have to develop. But I'm watching the body language. I am watching their facial expressions, the nonverbal, the verbal. I'm listening to what they're saying. I listen to how they say it. And I have to catalog some of those things they say, because I'm going to come back around later on and I'm going to address a question in the same way, and I'm going to expect a different answer. And so then that is something that I can start to show them that, look, we've got some conflict here, and I just need you to explain to me why you said this earlier, but now you're saying this. So what am I not understanding? I want them to have the ability to explain to me what it is that is bound up inside of them that they want to get out, and they're just having a hard time dealing with.
Super fascinating. I think that you just gave me a show idea. I think we'll do a show called The Interview Room, and we'll do some role play and show people how you do this. I would love to do that. But Jonathan, I asked the other night, I had retired Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson from the Birmingham Police Department, and Peter Massey, who is a former detective. And I was curious about this as a public service, because the university says that they're offering, some extra security measures, that they're going to offer self-defense courses once people go back, et cetera, et cetera. How important is situational awareness, Jonathan? And let me ask you, it's a crazy world we live in, shootings at the mall. So when you go to dinner, Jonathan, or you go to the mall, I'm sure you're looking around much differently than the average person. Take us into your world when you're walking about in public spaces.
So I'm going to get one of my books here in a minute. I'm going to show you a line in there. If you could bring me one of those books, if you get a chance. So it's very important. Okay. Awareness is extremely, it's the number one thing. Okay. So thank you. Just like as Phil was talking about building a relationship when you're interviewing somebody, awareness is the greatest thing you can have before you do anything else. You want to carry a concealed weapon, you need to have an understanding of where you would have to use that, why, who you would have to use it against, when you would ever break leather to use that weapon, right? All that's awareness: who, why, when, where, and how you could be attacked. And so in this book, what I really go into is about the predator versus prey, understanding how to look at yourself from the attacker or the predator standpoint, and then turn around and look at yourself as the defender or the prey, and use that understanding that you gained from the attacker's mindset to build better defenses and awareness. You can learn karate or jujitsu or mixed martial arts all you want, but if you don't understand where these things could occur, you're more likely to walk right into it, right? So you want to know what areas to avoid. And like I said, I've said several times on shows, for people to not go and get wasted at these universities to the point where they, are going back. I mean, everybody gets drunk in college, but especially at that college right now, they don't need to be that drunk. You need to be very aware of where you're at. I want to say this, though, how it links to what Phil was saying is that awareness, even in interviewing, is the key, right? Awareness is always the foundation of everything you do in life. The more aware you are, the more you critically think your way through life, it's going to be the same as if you're in an interview. We do this. This is probably the greatest course, one or two courses that I had in the FBI. This one I actually had when I was an agent, about statement analysis. Polygraphers, it's really not the machine that they get you with. It's the statement analysis in the interview before you even go into the polygraph machine. And when it comes to looking at these individuals that we're interviewing, as Phil said, you're going to build a relationship with them, and you're going to become aware of what their normal behavior is, what is their likes, what are their dislikes, how uncomfortable are they, and can you bring them down to where the real person is coming out. When you can build that relationship in 2 hours, I've been with a guy that we arrested for 8 hours one night. We needed to ask him one question, and we could not get him to answer this question. We thought he had scabies. It turns out he was a coke addict, and that's why he had sores all over him. But we sat in Bellevue with him all night, and we didn't just sit there. We built a relationship with him. We made him laugh. We let him right when he was falling asleep. We would say, "Hey, are you hungry, or do you want some coffee?" We'd wake him back up, so we were keeping him sleep deprived. And the more sleep deprived he got, the more he wanted to engage with us, the more he thought that we were being his buddies. And by the end of the night, when we got in the car, I finally gave him a sandwich. I gave him a Coca-Cola. He started to eat it. He took a bite. He was so happy. And I said, "Can I ask you one question? I hope you trust me enough now to know that I'm looking out for you." He said, "Yeah." He goes, I wish I'd have gone down a different road. I wish I would have been a cop like you guys. It just seems like a great job." I knew I had him right there. And I said, "Did you sell the gun to this guy?" And he goes, "Yeah, of course I did." And I said, "Well, how can you tell investigators before?" He goes, Oh, they didn't ask me right. So he became almost like a friend to me at that point, and he became an incredible source. We used him tremendously. And it was a shame to see him. He went back to jail because of drugs. But in this book, Sheep No More, what I talk about is that it's awareness. If an investigator can sit down with somebody and interview them, bring them down to a level and monitor, this relationship that's building, it's because the investigator has awareness of behaviors and how people act on a normal basis and the statements that they make. Guilty people, I think I said this on a show before, 20% of all the people who call in a homicide to 911 are the people who committed the homicide. And when they say and describe what happened, it's totally different than somebody who walked up on a homicide. Those people will be screaming like, you got to get somebody here, they're dying. And then the person who committed it is very calm and collected and saying, they usually talk about how much blood there is. Oh, there's blood everywhere. Do you need an ambulance? Yeah, probably. The guy looks like he's not doing real well. They're calm. So again, the 911 operators go through statement analysis, or they should, so they're aware of these things. So these college students, the faculty and staff, the police department there, they have to be aware of the surroundings, the normalcy, and then they'll start to see things like, if playing the what if game, if I was going to attack me, which way would I come from? What type of attack would it be? And that's the way investigations unfold. That's the way you get evidence, and that's the way you protect yourself.
Surviving the survivor. We don't just give you the news. We tell you how to stay safe. Phil, I'm curious. Just this topic fascinates me, and then we're going to get right into viewer comments and questions. When your kids were younger and you took them to, let's say, the mall or a restaurant, let's say, you always take a corner table where you can see people coming in and out and you can watch what's going on? Are you always hyper aware? Or when you go to a movie theater, do you know where the entrance and exit is? What goes on in your mind as a guy who's seen horrible things happen?
Well, I'll answer that question this way, Joel. My wife and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary Sunday.
Congrats.
Went to the best steakhouse in the world called Taste of Texas here in Houston, Texas. And I was placed in the corner table with my back to the corner so that I could see everything that was in front of me. So to this day, I still operate that way. I always am. I used to teach street survival, a law enforcement instructor, and I worked undercover narcotics for a number of years. So I had to be very aware of my surroundings. And there were a couple of times at my children's birthday parties that we would go to some gaming place somewhere, and I'd walk in and I'd look down the row of machines, and I would see some guy that I just bought an 8-ball of cocaine from the week before. So I had to just kind of walk past my wife and say, I got to go to the car. And she knew what was going on. And I walked outside and I got in my car and I waited till the person left. And I went back in and enjoyed my daughter's birthday party. So, yes. Wow.
I promise the audience we will do a story on Jonathan and Phil's police stories. We'll do a whole season of shows.
That thing that Phil just said, you cannot believe how many cops, it's happened to me, where you're involved with something and then I've gone to arrest before. We went up to Harlem to arrest somebody, and it turns out that the sister of the two guys, the fugitives we were looking for, had an apartment in my building in Manhattan. I mean, what are the chances of that, But there's so many stories where investigators or cops have arrested somebody and they're coming out the door, and the dude holding the door for them is somebody that they locked up for 20 years for murder. This stuff happens all the time.
The small world we live in. So finally, on to some viewer questions and comments. We'll see how many we can get through before we all burn out. First one comes from Mickey Beavison. Love the name. Great episode. I was surprised why the guests on the last episode were so confused on how the house could be targeted. The main reasons are lack of windows, egress in and out, general escape paths, and floor layout. So there was a discussion that came up where people, the guests on the previous show, basically ruled out the fact that the house was a target, just the people. This person is saying they could have targeted the house because it was an easy house to target. Phil, you're burrowing your eyebrows.
Well, I can say just based on the scene, nobody walked into that house because it was the house. They walked in there because somebody in that group had offended them in some way, angered them in some way, rejected them in some way. And it's way too personal. That scene is way too bloody. There's way too much damage inflicted with an edged weapon in that thing, and that denotes to me that. And I don't say personal in the sense that they may have had an intimate relationship with any of those people in there. It may be personal because they just met them that night somewhere, and they took whatever that relationship was or whatever that contact was in a personal way, and decided the only way they could reconcile that was to go in there and slaughter 4 young people.
And the nature of the crime, serial killers don't target homes; they target people. And they may walk by a house and see it lit up with girls in there, and so that leads them to go to that house. But by and large, I don't remember reading of any serial killer or any killer where they said they targeted that house and went in and then went on a rampage. I mean, people don't go on rampage, and I know Phil will tell you this, and I think we mentioned this before. This is another thing about, whether it was somebody that works at the university or went to the university, whoever this is that did this, I can 100% guarantee you that they have had issues with violent behavior or deviant behavior to the point where they probably got in trouble before, or have raped somebody before, or done something violent or killed somebody before. This isn't the first time, and I don't think that type of personality, it's not the movies again. It's rare that you get a killer who will do this type of a brutal killing in an area where they could potentially get caught and not have shown that behavior publicly. And that person would not function well in an institution. They just wouldn't.
Well, Joel, I'll tell you the easiest way to answer that question, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it. Look, burglars target buildings, and people target people. So, murderers target people. So that's the business about the structure being a target. I agree with Jonathan. I don't.
And that makes a lot of sense. I love this next comment / question because it's something that I should have asked and I didn't. It comes from Susanna Sunnybrook. If your guests, Phil or Jonathan, could ask the police, detectives, and FBI working on the case one question, what would it be? Jonathan, is there one question you would ask the investigators?
Have they looked in the grates? I watched this one online sleuth. His name's Jonathan Rich, I believe, and he walked around the entire neighborhood at night. I thought he did a fantastic job. He's an internet sleuth, and there are sewer grates all over that neighborhood. So I want to know if they actually pulled those up and looked for a murder weapon anywhere down inside of there, because they have little physical evidence right now at this point. I mean, I have a lot of questions for why they've done anything, but I think from an investigative standpoint, have they pulled those grates and looked down in there to see if they can find a knife of some sort that might have been used?
Phil, do you think they would have done that?
Well, I can tell you, speaking from my own experience, when you have a scene like this and you don't have a murder weapon at the scene, that scene needs to be expanded, and you've got to search as far out as you can for places like grates, trash cans, anything that something could have been thrown under, which is a Herculean effort, especially in a place like this with a lot of other structures around it and so forth and so on, and you just have no idea. But I think yeah, that's something that should have been done. Hope it was done. And I think I saw at some point where they had some people in the back of the structure and tape going all the way around it and that kind of thing. So I don't know if that was an indication of a search for a weapon, but I would think as a matter of drill that would have been done. But I'm with Jonathan. I think that's a question that you'd like to ask and see what the answer is.
Hey, I got a question for Phil.
Yes, sir.
In all your years of doing, investigating as an FBI agent, it's different than being a police officer who investigates, because the people need to understand the difference between an agent and a police officer. We spend a lot of our time behind the desk. Police officers are always on the ground. They're always there. They, of course, detectives do sit behind the desk to a certain degree, but they're on the ground. That's the way they grew up. They were raised on the ground. And have you, in all your years of doing these homicides, have you ever seen a scene that was so bloody that it oozed out of the wall onto the foundation of the home? I've never seen that personally myself. And now in this homicide, we're seeing that.
Right. No, I can't say that I've ever seen that. Of course, I've seen scenes, and you probably have too, with even bodies in cars that have oozed out of the vehicle, that kind of thing. I don't recall seeing anything like that. Not like what we've seen in this particular scene. So
yeah,
which just gives you an idea of the massive amount of blood evidence that they've got in that house.
Yes. And it also tells me that whoever bled out, whether it's both of those people, the young people that were down there on the bottom floor, they bled out most likely, which means they did not die rapidly. They may have been incapacitated, but once your heart stops pumping, you're not going to get as big of a volume of blood. You may get seepage, but if they're still alive, they're still pumping blood, and they'll bleed out, and it's a tremendous amount. But I've never seen so much that it seeped down out of the wall like that. I've never seen that.
Well, you've got four people in there, and I mean, I get Ethan Exonar on the second floor, and then you've got Kaylee and Madison on the third floor, and again, the edged weapon that's used and the manner in which it's used. I think obviously the autopsy would tell whether or not there was any particular strike that ended the life at that point, or like you said, whether it was the life literally bled out of it.
And we both used the K-bar knife. Yes. I know you've used it, I've used it, and I don't like the knife. I think it dulls easy, the tip breaks off, and it would never be my knife of choice to do that type of killing. That is a big knife, and it does not hold that edge to kill that many people with. That's a workout.
Well, it is a workout. That the K-bar, that was 1942, where the Marine Corps adopted that knife as a utility weapon. It really wasn't necessarily brought on as a knife fighting weapon.
Right.
And then the Department of the Navy adopted it as well. And I know that at the beginning of this investigation, they were very quick to say a K-bar knife. They actually named it, and then they showed it. And then they kept calling it a Rambo style knife, which it's not. But I had one guy that just wanted to argue with me about it's a Rambo knife. I said, well, you need to go back and watch Rambo, because this is not a Rambo style knife.
I wonder if the tip broke off on that knife, because every K-bar except for one that I had, the tip broke off of it. And if you hit a bone or something like that, I don't know how they would determine that it was that specific knife, unless the wounds are that detailed.
I would be interested to know what the type of wounds are. Are they slashing wounds, or are they puncture wounds? So if they are a slashing wound, that K-bar's got a sharp edge on the front end of it on the top, and then it's got the sharper edge on the length of it. So you could be, if this person knows how to use a knife
and how to sharpen a K-bar.
Exactly, how to sharpen a K-bar, and comes in there and starts making, the cross slashing. Right. And then if they flipped it in their hand and do a puncture thing, and of course, in cases that I've worked where knives were used, many times the suspect would cut themselves, because they get so into what they're doing that they don't realize where their hand is, and they'll cut themselves. And that's another thing about the blood evidence there, that is that one drop of blood that's over there by itself on the floor, is that a transfer from one of the victims, or does that belong to the suspect? So they've got so much blood evidence in that place, and they'll be able to track, where, when it happened, and how the course of events went in there through the DNA and so forth and so on. So, but back to your point, I can't even fathom the amount of blood evidence that they've got in those scenes.
And Joel, I'll tell you, I'm probably one of the only guests you'll ever have, and I'm going to break this news right now. I haven't said it anywhere else, that has actually stabbed himself with a K-bar knife. I'd been up for 3 days. We had to clean our weapons before we went back to bed. This was in Buds and SEAL training. And I told the guy next to me, I was like, back up, because I'm going to open this big bottle of Simple Green. And I went to go pull the lid off with it, and I stabbed myself right here in the arm. And it went about that day. I had to have 5 stitches with there was no Novocaine or anything like that. The corpsman just stitched me up. But that far into my arm, and it bled like you just cannot believe, and caused a pretty good wound. But so the K-bar does create a fat wound when it goes in there. But that was a puncture, not a slice.
Right.
Because if you don't know how to sharpen that knife, it's like trying to cut somebody with a broomstick.
Right.
Well, as a nice Jewish boy from New Jersey, I can tell you, and it probably comes as no surprise, I never even heard of a K-bar knife until this case. But Phil did rub it into you, Jonathan, that the Marines had it before the Navy. So there. But Phil, I'm curious.
That explains why Jonathan cut himself with it. So.
My dad is a retired psychiatrist. My mother is a social worker. So I'm always curious about the psychology. And when you were in your heyday, and you were called out to a homicide, what was it like for you? I mean, physically, I assume you didn't get much sleep, and emotionally, your wife, might have been talking to you, but you were thinking about the case, I would imagine. But what was it in those first, 48 hours, as they say? Were you up for 48 straight hours? Did you feel like you had to give it everything you got right out of the gates? And what was your mindset generally when you were first working a case?
Well, every investigation is different, of course. I have had those that every investigation, though, that I got involved in, every homicide scene that I ever made, it was always full tilt. It was always, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do everything I can to get this case solved. And there wasn't going to be anything that I was going to do that would keep that from happening. If I didn't get the evidence that I needed, if I wasn't able to identify a suspect and so forth and so on, then I would just have to live with that reality. But the attitude that I had was, regardless again of who's lying in the ditch or who's laying in the bed, it doesn't make any difference to me. Again, race, creed, color, orientation, flavor makes no difference to me. That person has been taken away from their family, from their friends by an act of violence. And it's my responsibility to them to try to find the right person who's done the wrong thing and bring about a measure of justice, and hopeful that we bring about a measure of peace for those family members and those friends.
Next comment. We'll try to bang through a few of these and then let you gentlemen go. I know your time is valuable. This one comes from Sloth Bear Fan. I said the same thing. The motive to this heinous series of crimes is the biggest mystery, other than who the killer is. Do you agree with that, Jonathan?
What was the question again?
The motive to this heinous series of crimes is the biggest mystery, other than who the killer is.
So I don't think it's as big of a mystery as what we would think. I mean, historically, when we look at these murders, I think why he picked these particular people is a mystery, but the reasons why this person killed, it's probably within a handful of reasons. And I think primarily the motivator is because this is an individual that got satiated from the killing. And I say that because yes, it takes a tremendous amount of rage. This person was, and when they get into killing mode, they're raged. But I believe that the way that this killing went through the house and the killer systematically killed, and the way that he used, or the weapon that he used, and I do believe it was a he, because of the nature of this killing. I think that this was somebody that has a desire that is fulfilled by deviant behavior, and he was satiated when he got through killing. And I think ultimately that's the foundation of the motivation. Why he picked this particular group of people, he could have been familiar with them, could have known that house, could have come by and seen all these people out there partying, and this was the day. You know, a lot of these killers fantasize about this stuff for a long time, or they kill one person and then they use that fantasy to satiate themselves over a period of time. And then it's like everything else, you know, when you watch Netflix and you get to the end of the one episode and you say, well, I should just turn the TV off because I got to work tomorrow, but I'm just going to watch 5 minutes of this one. So you have gone to a point where, you know, and then 8 hours later, you're like, I got to go to work and the sun's coming up. You watch it all. That's because your need to be satiated gets greater and greater as you get attached to this. And for people who have deviant behavior, I think really that's what it comes down to is this person had a need to satiate. And again, that's how I think law enforcement should be looking, or why law enforcement should be looking for records of deviant behavior, I think within a 3 hour radius of where that occurred.
Phil, anything you want to add on the motive question? Any thoughts on it?
Well, I think, again, in my experience, I know I'm going to use an acronym here that Jonathan's familiar with, you know, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. And when I've seen complicated crime scenes, complicated homicide scenes like this one is, what is going to, in most cases, what ultimately happens is it's a very simple answer as to what happened. And then the ultimate question is, and always in any homicide investigation, is the why. And sometimes that's where it can get complicated. And that's going to be determined by who the suspect is and if they are willing to explain why they did what they did, or if there's some other information out there about them that will explain or help to explain why. But obviously, if they weren't deviant when they started this, they certainly are deviant now. And I think, to agree with Jonathan, that I am sure whoever this person is at every television set on YouTube watching this stuff over and over again, because as Jonathan has used the word satiated, I think it becomes a process of having to have that feeling over and over again. And every time they watch this thing unfold, or these new clues, or these podcasts and so forth that broadcast on these news networks, I think it fulfills that need over and over again.
And you know, one thing about that, the relationship that Phil was talking about earlier, satiation doesn't necessarily have to do with the killing, but many people will confess because they have to get it off their chest. They have to say it. And the more that you can bring this down, like the police could find somebody and they start questioning them, and that person could either be a psychopath and he wants to brag about it, or and I don't believe this is going to be the case in this one, but I'm sure Phil has had countless numbers of people who have committed what they call passions or crimes of passion. They do feel bad about the fact that they did it. And if you can bring them down, their ultimate satiation is going to be that I got it off my chest.
No. Yeah, Jonathan, you're spot on, man. I mean, I've sat, the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. A sociopath feels justified in what they did. Mm-hmm. Psychopath enjoyed what they did. They committed a sociopathic act, but they enjoyed what they were doing. And I've talked to a lot of people in that room that were, I'm just going to use this word, but were good people who did a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And then I have talked to people in that room who are evil people who did an evil thing. And I mean, so there is a difference between the two. The ultimate outcome is the same. And you're right. I mean, I used to tell people in that room when I could see when they go into what we call surrender, where they've got that head down, they're thinking, gosh, you know, they're just right there. And they're going to come up with one of three answers. They're going to come up and they're going to deny, and you're going to go right back into the routine again, or they're going to come up and negotiate. So, you know, what would somebody get if they did something like this, that kind of a thing? Or they're going to come up and they're going to make an admission. They're going to say, you know what, I did it. And then that's where you start, okay, tell me about what happened. You know, what was going on? What was going on? And, you know, so you get them to that point. And I've told, I don't know, countless suspects in that interview room that you need to get this, to use your word, off your chest. You need to, because I'll tell them, I'm looking at you right now, and I can tell you've got this bottled up inside of you. And the only way it's going to eat away at you just like a cancer. And here's your opportunity to remove that from your person. And then when they do it, what's always been amazing to me is once they get to that point, you can't shut them up. You can't shut them up. Yeah. They just start, here we go. And they may give you a self-serving statement and that kind of thing, but you can't shut them up. And I will tell them when they're through, when we've got the total story, or as much as we're going to get as close to the truth, I'll tell them, I said, look at you. I said, don't you feel it? Because I can look at you right now and look at how calm you are. You've made this release, and they do get it. And I had one guy that I was in the interview room for 6 hours on a capital murder case, and we went over and over again. He kept going into surrender. He kept popping up, kept going into surrender, and finally, I told him, I said, you know, the word no is no longer an option. You did this, and then you got to give him that better choice, right? So it either happened the way you said it happened to your friend, or you're a cold-blooded murderer, and you walked in there. Now, which one is it? Is it the way you told your friend, or is it this? And then finally, he looks up and he goes, "It's the way I told, you know, Kindred." And then you have him explain it. Then after it was all over with, he finally got it all out, and he looked at me and he apologized for wasting my time.
Man, I feel like I want to confess something.
It's
I
funny.
don't know what it is, but
I feel the same way,
like
man. You know what's interesting? I was just thinking that such a big part of the Christian religion too or Catholicism is confession, right, Phil? Yeah. It's interesting.
Well, I'm not a Catholic. I'm a Southern Baptist boy from
Same
Oklahoma.
Here.
But all I can tell you is that
confession is as old as time.
I'm a Christ follower, and it's not about a religion; it's about a relationship.
Yeah, same thing there. And I will tell you, the way, first of all, I'm a Southern Baptist. Well, I grew up Baptist. I mean, but in the same light. But what you just saw right there, what's so incredible. I've watched a ton of interviews. I mean, we in the FBI, next to shooting, interviewing is what we spend the most time on in the academy. Every day we are interviewing actors. And so we really learn how to build these relationships. But what you just saw with Phil, you could take that and you could play that in a police academy. That was a professional talking right there. Because when Phil's talking about this, you can see the legitimacy of him saying, I know this is heavy on you. I mean, we do things where we get close, put a hand on their shoulder. If we know that they smoke, I don't smoke. I'd take a pack of cigarettes in there with me and put them on the desk and say, the sooner we get this over with, the sooner we can go get a smoke.
Yeah. And,
and so you just build that, so that is a professional, what you just saw right there. That was incredible listening to that.
Well, he's very genuine, and Chris Anderson, who we had on, and your guys are genuine and real, and I think that contributes to it as well. 3 more comments, and then we'll wrap this Joe Rogan experience up here. Eugene Plum, He writes, I believe this crime is going to be solved by forensics. Do you believe that, Phil?
I don't think it's going to be, well, to say it's going to be solved by forensics, because there's so many avenues now that I didn't have available to me. This genealogical DNA stuff is just absolutely amazing. So there is the possibility, certainly, that if they can differentiate all this blood evidence and get it down to a DNA sample that is identifiable, entered into CODIS, you don't get a hit, and then they start tracking the genealogical of it. But the problem is with this scene that they had so many people, so many kids in that house at so many different times. They're really going to have to. It's going to have to be. It's not like they just come in there and they just swab a bunch of things and they send it all to this lab and miraculously they come up with these profiles. Because I know in my experience, we would have evidence that we believed was going to be good DNA evidence. And then we would meet with the technician. And then if it was a piece of clothing or a shoe or some other material or where we got that swab, we would discuss what is the most probative part of this evidence that we can extract the DNA from. We would have that discussion. So it's not as simple. I mean, to say it's going to be solved by forensics, perhaps, but then perhaps they get the phone call and the forensics is used to shore up the case and make sure that they have a successful prosecution.
And that's why it bothers me so bad that they went in and removed things from that house. I was watching a show the other day, and they solved, it was a cold case show where they had solved the case after, I don't know, it was 18 or 30 years, something like that, because they focus on a mayonnaise jar that had been at the crime scene, and they were able to lift a fingerprint off that from like 30 years before, because the technician was much better than the technician was before, and they didn't even put a fingerprint search on that mayonnaise jar. And what they found out was that the way they had held it didn't match up to this. It matched up to somebody holding it like this, and that fingerprint led them to the killer. So, physical evidence.
So you think it was a bad idea that they return the evidence? The belongings to the family.
There's no reason to have done that now.
Well, I will tell you that the only reason I can see that happening, and I've done it before, where you have pieces of evidence that have been collected, but then the value of that evidence has been determined. And that if it is something that is deeply personal, of course, I've returned it to the families when it had no other probative value to it. So I can kind of understand. I'm hoping that's what that was.
Yeah.
I was a little struck by boxes of stuff being delivered.
Boxes of stuff being taken to the people who are criticizing the police for not doing their job.
Yeah.
I don't.
But you got to understand that's a double-edged sword, right, Jonathan?
Yeah.
I mean, it is the families, and they're trying to be cognizant, certainly, of the emotional issues of that.
Yeah.
Thing. So, that's what I'm hoping for, is that that whatever was returned no longer has any evidentiary value to it.
Yeah. All that goes back also to that professional experience, having a chief or somebody a prosecutor can sit down and say, listen, we want to get this back to you, but this could be the make it or break it in catching a killer. So we would like to freeze this in time if possible. I've had
that. Yeah. No, I agree.
I had this debate with a buddy of mine who's an FBI agent. He was like, you're crazy. And I was like, we had Joseph on here. Joseph said that they have literally boarded up a house and froze it in time until they found out what had happened.
Yeah. No, I've had that discussion. I've had that on the other side of that. I have had that discussion where I've had, I really want to get this back because it means so much and this and that. And I've had to tell them that at this point, we're holding it because it may be used as evidence in a trial later. So I've had those discussions both ways.
Two more comments. This one comes from the Skeeter Girl. Cold case detective Ken Main says offering a reward too early brings out kooks looking for a payday. Then there's the added burden of having to investigate the tips these grifters provide. Main says the time for rewards is when a case is starting to go cold. We bring this up because someone asked, why has there been no reward Phil, do you agree with Ken Maines that it's too early to put a reward out there?
I don't know that I would agree or disagree in particular. I think that rewards are offered, and that comes in a collective effort between the detectives, the families. And, in Houston, we've got Crime Stoppers. I don't know if they have any particular resource like that in Moscow, Idaho, but in Houston, Crime Stoppers immediately has a $5,000 reward for any murder in the city. And then there may be family members and so forth and so on. I know I had a capital murder that was involving a very well-known businessman in Houston, and he owned several McDonald's around town. The mayor knew him, and so forth and so on. And McDonald's, those associated owners in Houston, put up, I want to say, as much as a $75,000 reward. But that was after several months, and the timing just. In fact, there was a point in time where they were wanting to go ahead and let's put this bigger reward in there. And I just told them to hold off, because Ken is right. It does bring out, when you start putting up money. I mean, they've already got 15,000 plus tips, and there's no telling how many of those are craziness. But when you start throwing money at it, then yes, it does tend to generate a whole new crop of ridiculous bunny trails that they're going to have to look into.
The other thing that I've been seeing a lot, not necessarily with rewards, but a lot with Gold Star families when somebody gets killed. And then you saw this with the Casey Anthony case, where they set up a GoFundMe page, right? And then they end up using that money for themselves when people were thinking it was going to an investigation or going to a reward. And so I would be very leery of people. If somebody says we're going to build a reward fund, I would want every penny to be accounted for. And you've seen some strange things when people say we're going to take money for and so we can get a private investigator to do this, and then they end up, like in the Casey Anthony story, buying a boat and wrapping it with. So they said they were trying to advertise with the number of the emergency number to call, the info number, and they put that on the side of the boat and then went out riding around the lake. I mean,
And a final comment here comes from Beth952. I believe she's talking about the killer now. I believe there's someone out there that is watching over their shoulder. He knows he's feeling the heat. I don't think this case is cold at all. So, Phil, to you, you're used to talking to killers. What do you think is going through this killer's mind right now?
Well, I think, as we've already talked about before, I think there's a certain amount of satisfaction with all the attention they're getting, in terms of, is somebody over my shoulder? Am I living in the rearview mirror? That kind of thing. I can't imagine that they're not living that way. I can't imagine any person that, having done something like this, they're clearly on the run. At least that's what we would be led to believe. And good grief, it would be a crazy possibility, but you never want to put out anything, that you can't prove to eliminate. They may be hiding in plain sight for all we know.
And we'll end with this question to both of you. Jonathan first. Will this killer be caught?
I mean, over 50% of all homicides never get solved. So, I think I could say it's a 50-50. It really depends on the evidence that can be collected. If that evidence points towards someone, and if they have investigators that actually do the job of going and looking at this in a very disciplined manner and investigating this the way a disciplined, diligent investigator would work their way through the case. There's so many variables where they could turn left or turn right, or not, again, not consider someone a subject because that's just too crazy. And then that person ends up being the subject. In this particular case, I think the issue with where it was and how many people left, I was thinking to myself, they should interview every single person that doesn't come back to that school and at least talk to them. But at the same time, they should interview the people that come back to the school. It's so basically they should interview everybody when they go to that school. So that's the way these investigations work. Is it's like there's so many different aspects and so few men and women to do the investigating that you have to categorize and then catalog everything that you do so that you don't repeat, so that you don't overburden the investigators. You have to be able to give people, get them to go home and sleep and shut down for a period of time so they can be fresh and come back in. Any of these variables can destroy an investigation. So especially something like this, where the one biggest question I have in this is I just don't understand how somebody could murder 4 people, not in one room, move all over a house with that bloody of a scene, that type of murder, and there's not one trace of physical evidence. That blows my mind that there's nothing there. So, that again, there's information still coming in from DNA. Maybe they got a DNA, but it doesn't hit on anybody because they've never done anything wrong, got caught for doing anything wrong before. But it is kind of mind-boggling that there's no fingerprint, that there's no blood DNA from somebody, as we talked about before. That you get to the 4th body, there's going to be DNA from all the other 3 bodies because he goes from one to the next. But I just cannot believe that there's no physical evidence in this destructive of a scene.
And we keep getting that question, where is the blood trail leaving the house? Phil, you get the final words. Does this killer get caught? Anything you want to add?
Well, I wouldn't even pretend to answer that question, yes or no. I think in regards to what Jonathan just said about evidence, we don't know what evidence they have. We know that they've collected hundreds of types of evidence, physical evidence, forensic evidence, and so forth, fingerprinting and that kind of thing. So, I am hopeful that the scene was processed by one of the evidence response teams from the FBI. I've used them myself, and they're very, very good at what they do. So I'm hoping and praying that was a resource that was used. And so, and they've got, I think I was reading 250, 300 pieces of separate evidence that they pulled out of that house. So that takes time. The processing of DNA evidence takes time. You're extrapolating and you're separating, and those guys that do that stuff, it takes time. And it's just not there's not a television solution on this thing. And I've said before, we live in this fast food world, and we're expecting a fast food solution to this thing, and if they got the order right? So that's just not reality. And the stat that 50-50 of these homicides in general get solved, I can only tell you that my own experience, I entered every scene, every one, and I worked over 400 homicides in the city of Houston. That didn't include kidnapping cases, aggravated assaults, murder for hires, and that kind of thing. But I can tell you that I walked into every scene believing that I was going to solve it, believing that I was going to find the right person who did the wrong thing and have some justice served. And I don't know, because of that, or I was a pit bull. I just wasn't going to put stuff down. You're going to have to stop me. And I can only tell you that of those 400 homicides, they had a 96% clearance rate.
Wow.
And 90% of those I obtained confessions in. So I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that I believe those detectives, those agents up there are, and I had a passion for what I did. And I believe in this particular investigation because it is so horrific, and because it has had such an impact on not just those families, that community, that department, and the country wide, that those agents and those detectives, the chief, every one of them, I think they are passionate about finding this person and bringing them to justice. And I think right now, I get a little disturbed about the criticism that the chief has faced and the department has faced. I don't think it does any good. And I think right now we need to offer up prayers for that chief, that department, those families, and those agents and the guys that are working this case. And let's pray that the justice is served.
Amen. And passion is why Fil Waters was one of the best to ever do it as a detective. If it is Saturday, it is time to get your true crime fill, F-I-L. And maybe also Jonathan Gilliam, if when I speak to him, decides to join us weekly. It'd be great. This was fantastic. For those of you who wanted a longer episode, your wish was my command. You just got it. This is like 2 hours at least. Fil Waters, as we just talked about, 23 years as a homicide detective in the Houston PD, a Marine, not a SEAL, but a Marine, the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations, and the star of the show, The Interrogator. We found out he hates the name. We'll call it The Interview Room from now on. Jonathan Gilliam is a public servant, a SEAL, an FBI special agent, a federal Air Marshal, and he wrote that book over his right shoulder. Go out and buy it. It is Sheep No More. You'll learn how to stay safe. Thank you guys for this super fascinating discussion. Don't you worry. We're coming back soon with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Love you, America.